Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about awareness. You may recall a couple weeks ago we started talking about how it's so important to be aware of yourself and others for social justice, and we're going to be continuing on that theme today. So we're going to start with a story about awareness, and it's called Babies in the River. So, once upon a time, there was a small village on the edge of a river. Life in the village was busy. There were people growing food and people teaching the children to make blankets and people making meals. One day a villager took a break from harvesting food and noticed a baby floating down the river towards the village. She couldn't believe her eyes. She heard crying in the distance and looked downstream to see that two babies had already floated by the village. She looked around at the other villagers working nearby. "Does anyone else see that baby?" she said. One villager heard the woman, but he continued working. But another man yelled, "Yes!" "Oh, this is terrible," a woman who had been building a campfire shouted. "Look, there are even more upstream." Indeed, there were 3 more babies coming around the bend. "How long have these babies been floating by?" asked another villager. No one knew for sure, but some people thought that they may have seen something in the river earlier. They were busy at the time and didn't have time to investigate. But now, after the woman brought this to her attention, they quickly organized themselves to rescue the babies. Watchtowers were built on both sides of the shore, and swimmers were coordinated to maintain shifts of rescue teams that maintained 24-hour surveillance of the river. Zip lines with baskets attached were stretched across the river to get even more babies to safety quickly. The number of babies floating down the river only seemed to increase. The villagers built orphanages, and they taught even more children to make blankets, and they increased the amount of food they grew to keep the babies housed, warm, and fed. And life in the village carried on this way. Then one day at a meeting of the village council, a villager asked, "But where are all these babies coming from?" "No one knows," said another villager, "but I say we organize a team to go upstream and find who's throwing these babies in the river." Not everyone was in agreement. "But we need people to help us pull the babies out of the river," said one village. "That's right," said another villager. "And who will be here to cook for them and look after them if a bunch of people go upstream?" So the council chose to let the village decide. So if you were a villager, what would your vote be? Would you stick around to put all your focus on taking care of the babies that drifted down the river? Or do you send a team upstream to find out where they were coming from? So that's the story. Some people never see injustice in the world, and maybe they don't know how to recognize it, or maybe they're focused on too much on their own lives, like those first people in the story that he's like, "Yeah, we might have seen something, but we weren't really paying attention." There's an author, Douglas Adams, that wrote a book called Life, the Universe, and Everything, and he describes this as SEP, which stands for somebody else's problem. He says that SEP is something we can't see or don't see, or our brain doesn't let us see, because we just think it's someone else's problem. We don't want to worry about it. And the brain just edits it out like it's like a blind spot in the car. You don't see it. So even if you look at it directly, you may not see it unless you know what it is. Your only hope is to catch it by surprise or out of the corner of your eye. And this is because it relies on people's natural tendency not to see anything that they don't want to. So if we don't want to see it, we just don't. It's like this blind spot if it's something we aren't expecting or can't explain, because it's just too complicated for our brains. Now, some people do see injustice, but they ignore it, thinking that it's not their problem or that someone else will handle it. Others see terrible things happening and they organize to help the people that are affected. So like the people that were taking the babies out of the stream. Still others, like the villager who wanted to head upstream to try to find and get rid of the cause of the problem. They want to so that villager that wanted to go upstream wanted to stop the babies from going into the river in the first place. Makes sense, right? And the reality is that we need both of these last two types of people. So we need the people who can provide the services to fulfill the needs that are the things that are happening right now, like taking care of the babies that were right there already drifting down the river. But we also need the justice makers who will work to make sure that all people have equal access to the resources they need to fulfill their needs. So that would be the people going upstream to find the root cause. So we need many people working together and working separately to bring about true change in the world. So everything in this story started with the villager who actually saw the babies and realized there was a problem and became aware of this problem. And being aware of injustice is the first step towards creating a more just and peaceful world. So getting the babies out of a river, of course, is a very extreme example. Other injustices may not be life-threatening, or, as we know from recent events, they might be. But this awareness is the first step. So then what? So once you become aware of it, once you see the babies, what do you do? How can you influence these things, and how do you get those babies out of the river? Because it's great to be aware, but to simply say, I see injustice isn't enough. So after seeing it, you want to do something about it, right? So sometimes you can directly address injustice yourself, and at other times you might need help. So I have a diagram here that can help illustrate this. Let me pull it up and share it with you. Okay, so here is the spheres of influence. You can see there's 4 different levels here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. This inner level, number 1, is self. And this is just your own being, right? This is all, the self is you. And so how could you bring more awareness and influence just yourself? So first, educate yourself, know what's going on, understand yourself, understand your feelings, understand how you feel about things, understand what your values are and how you want the world to be. And think about how you want to live, and how the ways you want to live are aligned with those values. And finally, with yourself, you can associate with others who share your values and your desire for change. The second level is close friends and family. So these are the people closest to you that you spend most of your time with. And how could you influence them? Well, you can examine how you want to interact with those people that are really close with you. You can have conversations with them about justice and injustice and things that are going on. And you can invite them to work with you to create more justice. And you can be a mentor to them. Maybe if you have younger siblings, you can lead by your example. Finally, the third sphere of influence is, say, your school, maybe your UCC, Seaside congregation. So those groups that you interact with regularly that are maybe not your closest friends or your close family, but you're still people you interact with regularly. And within this sphere, you can examine who you want to be and how you want to interact with the people in these groups. And just like with your close friends and family, you can do the same thing. You can have conversations. You can talk about justice and injustices. And you can find allies among these groups of people. So people at your school, the congregation, or other groups that you're involved with, you can find out who shares your values and your worldviews and how you can work together to achieve justice. And then finally is the larger community. And so, for instance, on our community of Mount Desert Island. And how you can influence the community is, once again, you think about, it's a lot about it, this is examination. So how do you want to interact with this community? Who do you want to be within that community and interact with the other members of it? And you can do things like attend events and rallies. You can attend lectures that are happening to help educate yourself. And there's been these rallies and protests that are happening on Sundays in Bar Harbor, so you could attend one of the protests. So or find other ways to work with the community, even if you don't go to the rally. to support it and to support the larger community and the work that the larger community is doing. So I wanted to show you this diagram because it's just a sort of a nice way to break it down and think about, once you have that awareness, once you're aware of your own feelings, your own values, and once you're also aware of the injustices that are going on around you, you can think of these spheres of influence as sort of a guide. You can start with yourself and how to influence yourself, and then start looking out further and further of how you can influence those around you. So that is it for today. I will see you next week. Until then, be safe and be kind.